Hey Math Aces! Welcome to Mr. Ace Math. In this lesson, we're going to be solving one-step equations, but we're only going to focus on equations that involve addition or subtraction. So in the description, you're going to see timestamps for different parts. Feel free to jump ahead at any point in time. In this lesson, we're going to do 6 things. First, we're going to solve an equation by using a model. Second, we'll go over one example of how to solve one-step equations. Third, we'll go over another example. Fourth, we'll have the pause and practice. These are problems for you to try to see if you learned from the first 3 parts. After that, the answers will be revealed, followed by a reflection to recap everything we went over. In order to be successful in this lesson, you should just make sure that you're comfortable with your basic operations, adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. Although, you'll probably only need to be comfortable with addition and subtraction. So make sure you know those, and let's get started. So let's say we have this equation here. X plus 5 equals 9. Equations are really special because the left side is equal to the right side. So the left side of the equation and the right side of the equation have the same exact value. You can think of it as a scale, where the equal sign is the middle of that scale. And on both sides of the scale, you've got each side of the equation. Now you want it to be perfectly level and balanced. You don't want to have more on the left so that it tips in this direction, or more on the right so it tips in this direction. You want it to be perfectly level and balanced. The only way for that to happen is to make sure that the left side and the right side are the same exact thing, just like a real scale. We don't know what x is, so let's use a box to represent that. And we'll use marbles in this example. So next to this x, I'm going to add 5 marbles. And on the right side, I want to have 9 total marbles. Remember, we want the equation to be perfectly balanced. We don't want it to tip to the right. We don't want it to tip to the left. We want it to stay completely level. So for that to happen, the left side and the right side must be exactly the same. So in order to figure out what x is, I need to get this box by itself. So I'm going to get rid of these 5 marbles. Which means this is no longer x plus 5. Because I got rid of those 5 marbles, now it's just x. Because we've got x by itself. But we took things away from here, which makes this side lighter, and this side's going to be heavier. That's going to make our scale unbalanced. So what can we do to balance this scale? Well, since we removed 5 marbles from this side, the only way to balance that is to do the exact same thing on the right, which is to remove 5 from this side. So let's do it. And now we don't have 9 marbles, now we have 4 marbles. And that evens out our scale. Now that the scale is even, that means that x equals 4, because there's 4 on this side as well, which makes a true statement. And take a look at this. If we go back to our original equation, remember that we said x is equal to 4. Let's take this x out and replace it with 4. So in our model, we'll get rid of the box and put the 4 marbles in. 4 plus 5 equals 9. And we have 9 marbles on the left and 9 marbles on the right. It's a completely balanced scale, and this forms a true statement. Our scale won't lean to the left, it won't lean to the right, it will be perfectly level because the left side is equal to the right side. And that's exactly what equations are all about. So here's our first example that we're going to solve mathematically. we've got x plus 10 equals 23. Now there are 3 steps to solving one-step equations. The first step is to drop lines around the equal sign. That's really important, so let's do that first. I'm going to put lines right next to the equal sign, and that's going to separate the equation into this side, which we're going to call the left side, and this side, which we call the right side. When talking about equations, most teachers will just say the left side and the right side. And what they mean is the left side or the right side of the equation. Keep that in mind because we're going to be saying that a lot. Step number 2. We're going to box all of our terms. We've said this before in previous lessons. An expression, which we have on the left side of the equal sign and the right side of the equal sign, is made up of terms. Terms get separated by your plus and minus signs. So this term here is positive x, this term here is positive 10, and on the right side, we've got positive 23. Now to step 3, which is to cancel out any addition or subtraction using inverse operations. But wait a second, what are inverse operations? Well, inverse operations are just opposite operations, and they're used to cancel out terms and isolate the variable. But what the heck does isolate the variable mean? That's fancy math talk for get the variable by itself. That's how we solve equations. So if the operation we see is addition, the inverse of that is subtraction. If the operation is subtraction, then the inverse of that is addition. If the operation is multiplication, then the inverse is division. And if the operation in the equation is division, then the inverse is multiplication. Now that we know our inverses, let's go back to the equation. Now remember, we want to isolate the variable and get it by itself. So we have to cancel out any addition or subtraction we see. We're adding 10 to the variable. So we're going to cancel that out by using subtraction. So we're going to subtract 10 from the left side, but we're also going to subtract 10 from the right side. And we're doing that because we have to balance the equation, just like the scale from our model. And balancing the equation is only done by doing the exact same thing to both sides of the equal sign. Now what happens to these 10s? They cancel out. And that leaves us with just x by itself. So we'll bring down the x, we'll bring down the equal sign, and then we'll do 23 minus 10, which is 13. That means our final answer is x equals 13. And when you have your answer for x, that's called the solution. That's just the numeric value for a variable in an equation. Here we have 56 equals y minus 16. Normally, we see it written a lot more like this, with the variable on the left. But because they're equal to each other, it doesn't matter what side you have the variable on. So what's step 1? Well, step 1 is to drop lines around the equal sign. So right next to the equal sign, we'll drop lines down. This is going to separate the equation into the left side and the right side. So what's step 2? Step 2 is to box all of the terms in the equation. So on the left side, the only term we have is 56. On the right side, remember, in order to separate your expression into terms, remember this right side is an expression. So this expression has to be broken up into terms by dropping a line in front of the minus sign. That means that we're going to have y as a term and this sign with this value as the second term, negative 16. Step 3 is to cancel out any addition or subtraction using inverse operations. So here we have minus 16. And what's the opposite or the inverse operation of minus 16? Well, that's plus 16. So I'm going to add 16 right under minus 16. And remember, that's because we need to isolate the variable just to get it by itself. So because we're adding 16 to the right side, we have to also add 16 to the left side. Remember, that's going to allow us to balance the equation like we had with the scale in the model. That means that if we're adding 16 to one side, we're adding 16 to the other side. So what happens to these 16s? Well, they're going to cancel out. And what's 56 plus 16? Well, that's 72. Then I'll just bring down the equal sign, bring down the variable, and we're done. So our solution is 72 equals y. Remember, it doesn't matter what side the variable is on and what side the number is on, because it's equal, which means you could also write it like this, and that would be totally fine. So you could say 72 equals y, or y equals 72. Either way, that's our solution to this equation. So here's your pause and practice. Just pause and practice. Hit the pause button and try these problems. Once you're done and you think you have all the right answers, hit play to see if you're right. Ready, set, go. So here are our answers. Number 1, the solution is f equals 13. Number 2, the solution is v equals 80. Number 3, the solution is y equals 56. Number 4, the solution is r equals 216. Number 5, the solution is g equals 12. Number 6, the solution is e equals 6. Number 7, the solution is b equals 130. And number 8, the solution is k equals 19. So let's recap what we learned today. A mathematical sentence with an equal sign is called an equation. In order to solve an algebraic equation, you must isolate the variable. That's a fancy way of saying get the variable by itself. In order to isolate the variable, you must use inverse operations. So if you're adding in the equation, to isolate the variable, you'll subtract. And if you're subtracting in the equation, you'll add. The inverse operation of addition is subtraction. The inverse operation of subtraction is addition. When solving one-step equations, how many steps do we use? We use 3. Step 1 is to drop lines around the equal sign. Step 2 is to box all terms. And step 3 is to cancel out any addition or subtraction using inverse operations.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Questions? Comments? Leave them down below.
And thanks for using Mr. Ace Math. Don't just pass math, ace it.